to this live edition of the Women in Sport podcast. Thank you so much for choosing to spend your rather humid evening with us. We really appreciate it, and we definitely hope it will be worth it. A bit of housekeeping. We're going to have a Q&A at the end, so if you would like to ask any questions, please just drop them in the chat box on the side. My colleague Beth will be looking after the chat, so she'll be collating all the questions. So if you would like to ask anything, then please do just ask in the Q&A. And afterwards, this is obviously a podcast, so it's going to be on our usual platforms. So head there to listen to it on Spotify, iTunes and Audio Boom. And also you'll be able to watch it on YouTube afterwards on this same link. So if you're on Eventbrite, you will also see a little PDF link at the bottom, which will have a link to our research that we're going to be touching on the discussion. So definitely take a look at that. And also thank you to our sponsors, CSM Live, for helping us put on this event tonight. So without further ado, let's introduce our panelists, our amazing panelists. I'm very excited for this one. So firstly, we have Amma Agbaisi, the former captain of the England netball team and Commonwealth gold medalist. Now, Amma, I imagine most recently you haven't done a panel event without someone playing the clip of the last second goal against Australia. So I don't have it at the ready, but it's great to have you with us.
Thanks. Yeah, I think for the last 2 years, that's been the only thing that anyone ever plays about me. But it's celebrate.
Well, we're gonna learn a bit more about you this evening, which is good. And next on the panel we have Jodie Cunningham. Now, Jodie is also an athlete. She plays rugby league for St Helens and England, and she's also an ambassador for the 2021 Rugby League World Cup. Hi, Jodie.
Hi, nice to be here, and it's great to be on such a fantastic panel.
No, it's great to have you with us, and you're also levelling up our geographic demographics as well, because I'm sure a lot of us are Southerners, so you're representing the North as well in our panel.
Yep, definitely very Northern, you can tell with the accent.
And we also have Steph Harland, who is the CEO of the charity Age UK, obviously a charity who have a big role to play during lockdown. So thanks for joining us, Steph.
Thank you. It's great to be here. So I'm afraid I'm in London too.
There you go, exactly. The Southerners are taking over. And finally, Kate Nicholson, our research guru, the head of innovation and insight at Women in Sport. Hello, Kate, who is from Yorkshire but lives down south, unfortunately.
Yeah, I've got northern roots, so good one, Jodie. And also, I'm a netball player, so Amma, I watched that last second goal with excitement. I can't remember what time it was, about 4 a.m. or something. So made my day.
Well, what we want to get started with first is we've all had such unique experiences during lockdown. Even though some of us may have similar jobs or, be parents or whatever it may be, but everyone's challenges has been very unique, especially for those on the panel who are elite athletes. So I just wanted to start with you, Amma, and then moving on to Jodie about what your lockdown experience has been like, because I'm sure there's some differences and some similarities.
It's been, I think, very up and down, which I imagine it has been for lots of people. So I think my mood to start with I was very keen and eager, and then kind of dropped off after about 2 weeks. But I play netball still in the domestic netball Super League competition, and that was postponed. And so my team carried on training on Zoom because we expected to return back to the court. And then eventually that was, the season was cancelled. I also do a lot of ambassadorial work. So I work for some charities, and I go into lots of corporate settings and do talks and do coaching and motivational things. And so that kind of just stopped immediately. And so I think it was just a really strange, I guess a strange situation for everybody. But we were furloughed from netball, but then my other work, it was just, I wasn't furloughed, it was just nothing. So I think just worry about income, mental health, what's going to happen next, what's going to happen off the season once the season got cancelled. what do I do? I think I play netball mainly because of the social aspect. So interacting with people, training with people, I sometimes find it really hard to motivate myself. But if I go to training with other people, they're there and I help push them and they help push me. And so that disappeared. And so I think I've gone through lots of stages within myself of what am I doing? What's the point? I had my family around. I was a little bit sick at one stage, and so then didn't want to be around my family because I was worried that if I did have the virus, I would affect them. So it's been, I think, a very challenging time for myself and I guess for everybody. And I imagine potentially similar feelings to people, but different actual situations.
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of that resonates with me. I definitely had that, what is the point feeling a lot. I think I probably said that to my colleagues who are watching right now a couple of times. Jodie, how was it for you? Is there a lot that resonates in what Amma was talking about from an athlete and personal point of view as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. When Amma said up and down, that is exactly how I was going to describe it straight away. Good days and bad days. Probably a little bit of a different scenario in terms of domestic league. Rugby league women's competition isn't professional, so my full-time job is working for the Rugby League World Cup, so I wasn't furloughed. I've been working the whole time, which has been great, I think, to keep me mentally motivated, keep me in a routine, which has been fantastic. And I've said a couple of times, you have to be careful what you wish for. I remember before all this happened thinking, I wish the world had just stopped for a little bit and let me catch up with all my training, with rugby, with work. It is hard to balance at times. And then it really did feel like the world just stopped for a bit. And at first I sort of enjoyed that. I felt like I got so many things done that were always on the back burner and I never got time to do. And then the longer it went on, the anxiety started to come in around, I haven't been able to get in the gym. I'm losing muscle. I'm probably putting on fat. Am I going to be really rusty when I come back? We've got a World Cup to build for next year. How are the other countries who are competing? How is it affecting them? Are they getting an advantage now because we can't play? And yeah, just all those worries, I think, start to come in the longer it went on. So we're still in a position now where we're not too sure whether we'll get a little bit of a season in for the Women's Super League domestically. We're sort of waiting on if we can get playing in the next month or so, and if we can, we'll have a limited version of our league, which will be great, because I think just mentally, as Amma said, that social side of being able to get together and motivate each other is really important. So we've just started some of that training, which has been really great for everyone. I think everyone's had that boost now. We've got back together. So hopefully if we can get some games in as well this year, I think it'll really put people back on the right track and get that motivation back.
And Steph, obviously, Age UK had a really unique challenge with a lot of the women and men that you support being in that vulnerable category. So firstly, how was your experience? And then also, what were the challenges as an organisation for the people you work with?
So for me, and I was just reflecting, Jodie and Amma, that your experience reminds me of the experience that quite a lot of our staff have had at Age UK, because we've had to furlough staff where we don't need them immediately on the front line. And we know it's been really, really tough for people. And in our organisation, there's been a real divide, I would say, between those people who've been furloughed, who've had a lot to deal with, family, health worries and other things, and those people at work like me, where it's been absolutely mad 7 days a week. And for us, in many ways, we had a challenge we had to rise to very immediately. And in some ways, that really helps in this situation. So we have a number of telephone helplines. We have one which is 24/7, the other that is from early in the morning till the middle of the evening. And the calls we've been receiving have gone through the roof. At local level, older people have needed so much help from my colleagues across the country. People have just switched on from working quite often 5 days a week to working 7 days a week, and completely reinventing, in many cases, the services that we provided up till now. And one of the things for us has been that we already knew a lot of people. We were already in daily contact with and helping and supporting and engaging with a lot of people who needed our help. And of course, the same people that needed our help before needed our help during the crisis. And then suddenly a lot more people who had been perhaps okay before, maybe, for example, people with families who live a little bit further away, but who could quite easily see their families quite regularly. I'm sure everyone knows people in that sort of situation, as well as people in a really wonderful way coming out to help their neighbours and friends. And I was just going to say, I think I'm one of those very typical people as well. I'm quite a sort of sedentary, office-bound person. So one of the things that's kept me going is probably actually taking a little bit more exercise than usual and taking that time. So unlike Amma and Jodie, who are kind of elite levels of fitness, worrying about, I think Jodie, I might have gained a little bit of muscle, just possibly, but there wasn't anything there before.
It's always great to hear, and I think spoiler alert, we'll definitely come to that as well. So Kate, nice to cue you in perfectly. How has what sort of Jodie, Amma and Steph talked about, how has that been reflected in our lockdown research with the women we spoke to?
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting actually, because we've had those two sides of the coin that we heard from Steph and we heard from Jodie. So for the women that actually were very active before and had organised activities, sports, exercise that they were doing, something that they really loved and they loved doing with other people, they're the people that were least satisfied when we went into lockdown and really struggled to replicate that sort of intensity and the buzz and excitement and fun that they got from their activities. So for some of those people, there was a bit of a drop in motivation because they didn't have that same level of enjoyment really coming through. And I think that the other side of that was from the women who actually had done less, suddenly found that doing exercise in the day was one of the things that you could do to relieve boredom. And also, government talking about the fact that actually exercise was an important part of everybody's day. It sort of elevated it to that daily staple, which is fantastic. I mean, we've been trying to do that for so long. And it has prompted some women to think, okay, I'll start to do something quite accessible, like walking or maybe a bit of cycling, a little bit of jogging, and actually firsthand feel the benefits of going out there, that freedom and enjoyment. So, we saw both sides of those happening, which was really interesting. So I can relate very much to the different stories there. And I think from my personal point of view, I went back to playing netball about 2 years ago after having played it a lot when I was younger. And not playing it again, I've just missed the social side. I mean, our group, we're mad on WhatsApp. And we're all communicating with each other, and we did the whole passing the ball in our garden and looking like it passed from one to the other, which was great and really exciting. So I think it is about, how do you keep that connection, and you realise how much you miss it. I don't think I'd appreciated it quite so much until lockdown happened, and suddenly it was taken away from me.
Yeah, so for those of us who obviously rely on that contact, whether it's through sport or the office, Amma and Jodie, how did you guys stay connected with your team? Amma, you mentioned that being part of that team sport is something that's so important. So what were the ways that you engaged with your team socially and also through training?
I think it was quite difficult. So we trained online together through video, and the coach basically shouted out instructions and we each did them in our individual spaces. And I think it was really frustrating because it was nothing like, the intensity physically wasn't there, and then also the camaraderie wasn't there, and usually I'll be messing around in the background with people and that couldn't happen. And so it was just a very strange setup, but I think it was actually good to have the continuity and the routine of that. And then once that was gone, it was quite strange. I had been wishing that we didn't have to do it constantly, but then once it was gone, I was like, oh gosh, it was actually really good. And then I think socially, just again, as Steph said and as Kate said, WhatsApp communication. And so just trying to make sure, I think personally, I try to just touch in with people, and I think lots of people have connected with some people they've not spoken to in years. And so every day, at least, I try and connect with 2 people, and then also try to get around my team to message them and see how they were going and things. But it isn't the same, but I guess it's still just trying to maintain some level of contact.
And Jodie, what was it like for you? I know we talked before about the innovative, shall we say, ways that some of your teammates were, stopping on the motorway to grab objects. I'm sure you'll talk more about that. But what were the things that you and your teammates were doing?
Yeah, really similar to what Emma said. It was the video Zoom sort of sessions is what we did to keep everybody motivated, keep everybody fit, and make sure that it was really difficult to motivate yourself. And I'm somebody, if I'm just going to do a session on my own, I don't push myself the same. I don't have the same drive to actually turn up and do it, whether that's in my own home or just going to the gym on my own. I like to do gym workouts with people. I like to do all my fitness with teammates. I think making that commitment to meet someone and be there at a certain time to do it is really important to keep me on a schedule. So I sort of tried to replicate that with a couple of the senior members of the team in terms of putting those regular Zoom sessions in place. So 3 times a week we'd do a session. It was always at the same time. We'd always send out, this is what we're planning on doing in the session the night before, so that everybody had that regular contact. They knew this time this week this is what we'd be doing, and that really helped us. But it didn't work for everybody. We had an uptake of some girls where without fail they would be on every single session. We also had some girls who struggled because they have full-time jobs, so some were frontline key workers. Some were taking up different roles because they were furloughed from their own job, volunteering, looking after family. So each of the girls had completely different situations and scenarios. So we just tried to work best we could around each of the individuals. And like Emma said, just touch in and make sure that if you haven't heard from someone or they've not been very active on a chat in a while, they hadn't logged into any of the Zooms, that just making sure that they're doing okay mentally, if they need any help or support to do some physical aspects of the work. Because I think the longer it goes on and the longer you haven't done a session, the more anxious you feel, the more you feel like you've lost your fitness, you feel like you've lost any of the progress you'd made prior to lockdown. So I think some of the girls were feeling that if they'd missed a few weeks, that, I can't join now because I'm going to be behind and I'm not going to be good enough. So it's just, I think mentally just trying to motivate everyone to just build that confidence up as well. The last couple of weeks have been great, just being able to actually get out and see people in small groups. So a local teammate of mine, we actually started playing together when we were 12. So we've been best mates. We play at St Helens together and we play at England together. We've used each other to push and do our own gym workout. So each bring in whatever equipment we've got to do our own sessions on the front path. The amount of messages my family have got saying, I'm sure I've seen your Jodie flipping tyres and throwing weights around on the front. And it was, and that's the way we've kept going. And we got a big lorry tyre, which actually my friend Emily, she drove past and thought, that's absolutely perfect. We need something heavier. So she put that in the back of the van, and that's what we've been doing, flipping tyres and just trying to get that added bit of exercise, a little bit more weight whilst the gyms weren't open. So yeah, anything and everything we could really to just keep going in one way or another.
Yeah, you've got to improvise. Emma, did you end up picking up any tyres or anything else for your training?
I'm really jealous. My mom is a key worker, and her car had something wrong with its tyre. So she went to the tyre shop, and I was looking at the tyres going, I need something to train with. They didn't have any truck tyres, unfortunately. But I just took two worn out tyres and thought, I can just carry them in the garden, and they're not that great to flip, but it was something. But I'm a little bit jealous that Jodie got the big proper tyre to flip.
Yeah, you could get a new job, Jodie, just driving around picking up gym equipment for isolated athletes.
Exactly. To be fair, you could see when we were doing our sessions on the front path, and we were literally, it's sort of a hilled path, so that made it a little bit more difficult with the tyre flipping. But you could see it was like when there's an accident on the motorway and everyone slows down as they drive past. It was that same sort of experience. Everyone was driving past thinking, I wonder what's going on there. And we sort of said regularly the amount of interest we got. I'm sure if we put a sign out and said that we're going to do some sessions, we could have made a little bit of extra cash. But we stuck with just doing our own sessions.
And Steph, you mentioned that you're a bit of an office owl, but for your team and also for the people you work with, how did you stay connected with isolation and loneliness being such a big factor of lockdown?
So we've, like everybody else, we've really made use of this kind of technology. So We've been getting together every day using Teams, which is, something that everyone that's been working through lockdown, I think, has been used to sort of sitting in front of these screens and joining in with everyone. I think that we have felt at times that we could make some really positive connections. And one of the things we've started to talk about, because it's been going on for so long, is what are we missing and what's been okay. So I think where we've worried is for staff members who maybe are not very comfortable at home, for staff members who don't have a really easy situation at home. That could be because they're lonely, or it could be as well because things aren't so easy at home, or because they have caring responsibilities or something going on with the family where it's been very much up to them. So we've tried really hard to encourage people not only to connect for the immediate task and the work, because I think that's one of the really important things in the working situation. Normally when we're all in the office, and I think this is true in every office, one of the things that makes it worthwhile for people and people miss is those moments, at the water cooler, or those things that we do together in our office. 2-3 years ago, one of my colleagues, Laurie, who's a great runner, and she does a lot of running with the running charity that you might have heard of. Laurie started a Couch to 5K club, and we right in the middle of central London, and colleagues have really, really enjoyed being sort of trained and supported by Laurie to go all the way through from, you really wouldn't have believed people who you'd never have seen were going to a run, going out and running together. And, when we're together, normally there are all sorts of activities that go on, whether they're, not all of them are sport, but things that really create that camaraderie that people were talking about. And that's what's been so difficult. So I think people have found new ways through digital technology. One of the things we've seen with older people is that some people that were quite reluctant to engage, but who did have that opportunity, have taken a massive leap forward. And there's all sorts of amazing stories of older people all across the country who swore blind that, they really weren't going to go there. They didn't, they couldn't, they didn't, they wouldn't. Even where they've had sort of super family support with people saying, come on, I can show you how to do this. So we've seen people take an absolute leap into the world of technology. We've seen people also, taking to online shopping and doing other things like that. But of course, there remain a huge number of people who aren't included. And I think it's the same, across all of the things we're talking about. This situation, for people who are in a really difficult situation, this situation has made a lot of things worse. So generally speaking, at our work, we can have supported each other, I think, reasonably well, and try to look out for those people who we know are having a really tough time.
And Kate, you wanted to jump in there?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think, I think particularly for that older group of women, it's been really hard. We did some research right across the life stages, and I would say there were two groups that were particularly hard hit. The mums, who found that they had such a huge proportion of the childcare and homeschooling responsibilities that they were struggling to carve out any time for themselves at all, and felt guilty whatever they were doing because they were never doing enough. But there was this older group of women, and I think we really need to think hard about how we can support women, particularly in their sort of 70s and 80s, who we talked to some women who had the exercise that they did was part of the structure of their week, and it was also their social connection. And I think if there's one thing we've all realized during this lockdown is how much we miss other people. And some of the ladies that I spoke to were having to self-isolate, and therefore that connection was lost completely. And some of the messaging that was going on during the start of lockdown was so negative about older people that they were scared and actually not wanting to listen to the news or do anything. And they really missed the social side of exercise. Just going on a walk on their own just didn't replicate that going off to their exercise class, their community centre, having a cup of tea afterwards. And they did feel a little bit isolated and left out in terms of what they could do next. So I'm really interested in how we can support particularly that older group of women going forward.
And Emma and Jodie, was there anything that you specifically felt that was different compared to, I know it's harder with you, Emma, because netball's not a professional men's sport, but was there anything that you guys felt was different to the experiences that some male athletes that you knew were having, or did you feel like things were quite similar for them as well?
I think you go, Jodie.
I suppose it's a difficult one because there's so many different parts of the jigsaw. It's not just as simple as they're going to affect both the same, because, for example, the men's rugby league, top league, they're all professional, so they've got additional worries, concerns and issues to sort in terms of, as Emma was saying, around being furloughed from the job, and concerns about the future. What state is the club going to be in? Is everybody going to be able to keep the contracts the same? Are they going to have to take pay cuts? So they had additional concerns that we didn't necessarily have, which made things a little easier. But then equally, because of the contracts that were in place with the broadcasters for the men's game, there's also added incentives in the game as a whole to make sure that the men's game is up and running quickly. So it's really hard to compare, I think, the two between themselves. But what's been really positive and for me made me feel really good about coming out the other side of this is I work quite closely in my day-to-day job with the Rugby Football League as the governing body for rugby league. And women's sport has most definitely not been lost in the conversations that are happening. Yes, obviously there's contractual terms that they've got to fulfill with the men's version of the game. But equally, I know that they're working tirelessly to make sure that in some form the women's game gets back up and running. And if that's not feasibly possible, do everything else they can around that to support the women to be in the best place they can be for next year, whether that be putting additional sessions on England-wise and splitting that into different regions, whatever it might be. They are very much having women's sport at the top of their conversations, which I think is really positive for us. And we were on such a really, really great trajectory in the women's game. We'd seen so much growth over the recent 2 or 3 years. So it's really positive, and I think makes all the women hopeful that coming out of this, we're going to carry on with that positive movement, and it's not going to get lost because naturally things are going to change and there's going to have to be cuts. But I think, the women's game's here to stay, and people value the contribution of women's sport.
Yeah, I think definitely, as Jodie said, people do value the contribution of women's sport, and netball, I guess, is in a very different position to some of the other sports because, as you mentioned, there's not the equivalent men's side at the same level. So men do play, but it's not at the same level at this time. I think what was frustrating for me was, I imagine during lockdown initially, things were the same for both men and women in terms of trying to find places to do their training at the levels where people had employment contracts, being furloughed or not, and then still trying to continue, because you can't just stop training and doing what you're doing and then suddenly come back and perform at the level that you were expected to. I think the differences started to come in when there was talk about sports coming back and competitiveness happening, and I think that's when the difference between women and men came about. And as Jodie said, it was pretty much commercial, the decisions made around men's sport coming back because of the sponsorships, the TV rights and all that pressure. And then I think just hearing through the grapevine, through people who are involved in football or know rugby players or things like that on the men's side, and hearing what their pathway to coming back was and how they'd gone into their bubbles already and they were paying for testing. And I think that's probably one of the most significant things, the difference between the men's and the women's game, is the men, because of the commercial funding, they could pay to test people in their clubs, which then meant they could train together. But then also, I think sometimes the number of staff that they had in those clubs meant that they could train in separate pods and have staff assigned to certain pods and things like that. And women's sport typically doesn't have that much funding to test people and then also have that many coaches or personnel to be able to have separate pods. And so I think that's when the disparity started to come about, and netball still isn't back. And as Jodie said, governing bodies are trying really hard, but I think it's a little bit like the conversation that we've been fighting in terms of putting women's sport up there and elevating women's sport. And when you're battling for equality, lots of people say, oh yeah, we're working on it, we're really hard, it's the top of our agenda, we're focusing on it. But there's a difference between focusing on it and talking and actually implementing things and making them happen. So it's hoped that female sport will come back, but it's nowhere near where it should be. And I think just the momentum that has been built up in the last, and I think, as Jodie mentioned, rugby league in the last 2 to 3 years, and netball again, I think since the Commonwealth Games gold win in 2018, and then the World Cup last year, there was a massive momentum shift. And we talk about it in the last 2 to 3 years, but actually that's taken multiple years. It's taken centuries to actually get to that place. And so it's not just it's just a couple of years so we can get back to where we were within a couple of years. It's taken such a long time. And so it's just making sure that that progress over decades hasn't been lost. And I think that's the difficult thing about female sport and comparing it to the men's side.
Yeah, definitely. Kate, one of the things we did find with the work is there were lots of women who actually, a bit like Steph mentioned, really wanted to take this opportunity as a way to engage. So with those women, how, I know there's specific stats on it, but how would be the best way to support them if they've shown an interest, if they've engaged in digital stuff? Jodie, I know your mum got involved in some of your Zoom workouts. So looking ahead, what's the way to kind of gather the momentum that, on some sides of the grassroots women's angle is there, and say, you may have found running at this time, and how can we help you continue that?
Yeah, and I think some of the simplicity of what people could do during lockdown is actually part of the solution. So being able to just go out and have a run, have a walk, do things that are quite simple. You don't have to learn so much. You don't have to have lots of equipment. That's actually really important. So I think we can learn from that and think about, how can we provide really easy, accessible for people to do, and to help them get back into activity. I think also for some of those women, they've really experienced it for the first time. So we need to remind them and keep reminding them of the feel-good factor that they had. Some of those entry-level activities, somebody mentioned the couch to 5K, and I think, again, something like that, which is a real access point for running, is brilliant. And it gives people a bit of motivation and self-motivation to do some of those things. We were talking actually with some of the sports governing bodies, and again, there's lots of walking versions of the game, walking netball, walking football, walking rugby. I've actually taken part in that. So there's some of these things that people might be starting to think about that we need to really bring to the fore and bring that awareness there, so that when we do start getting more activities back together, there are some options which are much more accessible. And I think just finally, the other thing we need to think about what's coming back is, how do we make sure that this is for everybody? And, for people who are living in poorer areas, for people who haven't got access to all of these facilities, sometimes the church hall, sports community centre, they are the community centre, they are the venues that they're using. So, we need to make sure that we focus on the wide range of opportunities that are out there and make sure that they're accessible to people too.
What's happened in some ways bears out some things that, Kate, we found in our joint research before, and both in the research we've done together and separately, which is that people are quite well aware these days of all age groups, including quite a lot of older people. They've heard the message about the health benefits of exercise. It doesn't always turn them on, but they are aware of it. And I think what we've seen during lockdown is a lot of people, going back to Jodie's comment about the world stopping, we've seen a lot of people who have very busy lives and who are pulled in lots of different directions. They have heard that message before, and they have had a little bit of space and time to do something about it. And that's been great. We also know that other people who were doing things, as you said before, Kate, their opportunities to do them have been sort of taken away. And some of the, particularly where people for a lot of older people, that kind of mix of the social and the exercise, people may think of the thing that they were doing as a social thing or as an exercise thing, and it doesn't kind of much matter really. So looking forward, I think we will see a lot of people who've had a real chance to try something. I think there is an opportunity for those people to carry it on and it be a long-term thing. But we're also facing across the country, and your discussion about the sort of economic status of men's sport and women's sport is so interesting. We're also facing, I'm sorry to say this, but we are facing a real crisis in our kind of community infrastructure across the country. There are real challenges about how we get people back into buildings like community halls and sports centres and gyms. And also there's an absolute crunch in public funding and the funding for charities and community organisations. So we're at quite a strange time really, aren't we? Where on the one hand, there may be lots of people who've had some opportunity to do something different and try something and have really broken through that barrier that maybe was holding them back before. But at the same time, we're seeing new barriers that we haven't really had to grapple with before that will get in the way of us being able to offer people some of the activity that we'd like to. I'm sorry, don't want to be too gloomy, because the answer is we have to find a way to get over that. But we're seeing new, we've got new challenges that we didn't have before, I guess.
And I think that's why we need to be really agile and really creative. And I love to hear about Jodie and the tire. That was the creativity to build that gym environment for her training. So I think it is about responding and being able to creatively think about what are the alternatives, because I think where we were at the start was we can come back to activity and it's almost going to go back to where it was. We'll come out of this and we'll all go back and everything will be up and running. But, we're having to adapt games so that there's not as much contact. We're having to think about where people are playing, what people are doing, what combinations of people can play together and not. So, there's so many different variables there, but I don't think it's insurmountable. And I think we can, if we think about how do we make it happen rather than just not what can't make it happen. So I think it's for us as sports providers as well, I'm talking about our sector, to really think carefully about what could we do differently. Let's be a bit imaginative about it. Let's think about how we can change things. And I think one of the things you mentioned, which I thought was really interesting, was about the increase in that capability amongst the older people that you've spoken to, because we heard that too. And it's not everybody. There are some who are going to be left out, and we need to think very carefully about how to manage them. But there are certainly, I was talking to some 80-year-olds who suddenly got an iPad for the first time, and they were getting involved in online activities, online dancing with Wells. I was hearing such stories that were really imaginative, and I thought, that wouldn't have happened in a way unless people had been forced to think a little bit differently. So I'd love to see a bit of creativity come out of some of this too.
And I think that. Oh, sorry, go, Jodie.
Emma, go on.
I was just saying, I think it's really nice to hear. And I think, as you mentioned, Kate, people just being inventive and governing bodies thinking outside of the box. And I think for so long we've been sort of straight down the line, sticking to rules. This is how it's done. And actually, this is an opportunity for people to listen to people, think outside the box, and encourage people. I think the danger that I was thinking was that there's lots of people who, as you said, you love the social aspect of sport, and so you're longing for it to come back, and that's a great thing. But there's people who maybe just recently took up sport and aren't necessarily doing it anymore and don't know the benefits and are missing out. And I think it's those people that we don't want to lose. And it's great to hear both you and Steph say that there's a lot of people who've understood now and taken up sport and realised the benefits. So it's great that we've now hopefully captured those people. But there are, I think, areas where people might slip through the cracks. But I think not just governing bodies, but everybody just thinking outside the box as to how they can achieve what it is they want to achieve. And so it's kind of one door has shut, but so many more doors have opened, and hopefully we can move forward and think, how can we get this done? Because we need to get it done, as opposed to we've hit a hurdle, what can we do?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I was just going to touch on in terms of people trying new things and being creative. And I think that drives in terms of your own family as well. I know myself and my brother was trying to drive my mum. She's always been really sporty. And she was missing the element of, so she plays badminton. She's got two knees that are an absolute mess, and she still fights through because she just absolutely loves playing badminton. And she's missed that. And that was her social aspect. And I think stereotypically, because women don't necessarily compete in as much sport as they get older as men do, I think that really affects the friendship circles that they have as well. I know my mum's always saying to my dad, you know everyone, and you've got so many groups of friends and you're always out. And my mum sort of struggles the other side because she's lost touch of a lot of the people that she was friends with when she was younger, because she stopped playing netball when she was 21. And then from that point on, you don't necessarily have the lots of different groups of friends and big groups. So we made a conscious effort with my mum to make sure we were keeping her active. So we made a makeshift badminton court in the back garden as well. So we had 2 big ladders with the washing line tied along, and then we had all sorts on there. So we were doing badminton in the back garden. She joined in my Zoom sessions with Saints because there was no reason why not. It was really accessible. She could just log on. And as much as she was quite self-conscious at first, I said, you don't have to put your video on. No one even has to know you're there, really. But you can just join in and you do it to your capability. You can make things easy. You can make them harder. You can take a break if you need to. And it just made it so much more accessible for her to join in. And she really enjoyed it and did so well. So, yeah, as much as understandably, there's going to be a lot of challenges for all sports to face in the coming months and years potentially. But it has opened many doors as well, and I think made people start reflecting and thinking differently.
Yeah. And I think what you're saying about families getting active together, you know, when you can only operate within a family environment, you start to be a bit creative, and different fitness levels can come together and do things and support each other. And we heard that a lot in the research, actually, about, you know, sort of older sons supporting mums, or, you know, daughters and mums. We heard a lot about mums feeling so much happier to have time with their daughters, actually, on in an activity level, in a quite non-judgmental space where they could just enjoy it and have a bit of fun. So, you know, that's something again that I think we can think about. How do we do things at a family level that really are catering for the whole family, not just for somebody to help their son or to help somebody in their family, but something that they can just have loads of fun with and really enjoy. So, you know, there are some opportunities out there that we might just trigger some ideas from people, which would be brilliant.
I think the other thing that we've seen a huge amount of, I mean, I think everything that you've all spoken about is so true. The other thing, of course, was we've seen this incredible spirit of people across the country volunteering to help other people, and people just getting out there and getting on with it. Often just very, very, you know, reaching out to their neighbours very spontaneously, building local communities. Again, WhatsApp has played a big part in many areas of the country with people, you know, breaking down barriers between other people. And I think some of that creative coming together and actively encouraging people has also happened in that space. So the other thing that we're very hopeful for the future is that, you know, quite a lot of relationships have been formed and friendships have been made, and people have found ways to do things together, and that some of that, as Sonny said a little while ago, won't stop, but we can really not only celebrate how we've responded in our communities across the country, but also really try to keep that spirit going, because I think part of what we're talking about here is people very naturally and in a very sort of as non-judgmental and very sort of equal way, just encouraging each other and saying, let's have fun and let's do something. You know, with Jodie with her mum in the back garden, what a great story. I mean, that's absolutely lovely. And I think the other thing, as we're saying, is that there is some, I think we've just done some things with tech, and some people have tried some things with tech that they wouldn't otherwise have done. So I think we're finding some ways to that tech and people doing things can come together. We are quite, we've seen all sorts of people taking to using technology that they wouldn't have used before, and we'd extend that to wearables as well, and people doing the, again, getting to understand, people who've never particularly used a smartphone won't necessarily know that inside your smartphone there's a step counter, and that's a kind of very simple thing that we've been promoting with people, and showing people and getting people to show other people, this is one of these many things this amazing thing in your pocket can do. It's not just for ringing people up with, it can do all these things, and one of the things it can do is, in a fun way, help you think about your activity levels. And what's quite nice about working with older people sometimes is that young people know all this stuff and they're a bit jaded about it, but to older people, discovering a step counter in a phone can be a bit of a miracle. So that's quite nice from our end of things.
Yeah, I think with all the challenges as well, we've spoken about some of those. There's also a lot of opportunity, and I think we've sort of summed it up quite nicely. And I know we've got loads of questions come through on the chat, so I want to move on to that so we get as much time as possible. So for Steph, someone has asked, has there been any evidence of your clients becoming more active, perhaps through the use of technology, which we sort of touched on? And do you think it's going to encourage people to become more active, especially with the fear that might have been instilled in them? So we've sort of touched on that, but we looked at the technology. But with some of the people you've spoken to, do you think there's going to be a legacy of activity with them? Oh, I think you're on mute, Steph, unfortunately.
Had to be me. I'm having a bad week for that. I think there is, as we've been saying, there is evidence of people trying things, of being inspired and supported by family and friends to try things. And also family and friends, I think, sometimes being able in the situation to press a little bit, whereas before it would have been inappropriate. So that's the thing, the big dynamic in families about that, I think. People sort of thumping the table and saying to their parents and grandparents, no, you really do have to learn how to do this now, and we're going to show you. I think there is quite a lot of evidence as well, and Kate will be aware of this, of people who have been very inactive, though, often people who are already quite isolated. And we know, again, this was work we did together 2-3 years ago. We know that by the time women particularly, by the time they get to 75 and over, about 21% of women are being as active as the guidelines suggest they should be in a week. There are many, many reasons. Some of the well-known kind of researchers and writers on this subject are talking about something now among older people and other people with existing long-term conditions. They're talking about the very sort of awkwardly named deconditioning pandemic. I'm sure, Kate, you're familiar with this. I think it needs a better name than deconditioning pandemic. Yeah. But really, we are quite worried about those people who have been very inactive. And we know that quite a lot of those people are also still very concerned about the idea of leaving home now. So we've got a lot of people that we really need to use some of the new techniques and new ideas and new ways we've got of engaging with people. We need to get those offers and invitations out to those people who are very much stuck at home and for whom this has meant that they've been less active and where they're really worried about coming out. So I think where we're really positive is some of the really nice things that people have been doing and trying and have invented and innovated quite spontaneously, people across the country. I think we need to take some of that to some of the people who've been left behind.
Yeah, I agree. And just to build on the thinking around the tech, I mean, one thing that we found was that sometimes the online classes, which were quite anonymous and had no feedback, were quite hard to sustain for some people. So it didn't feel as motivating as being with some people they knew. So I've spoken to quite a few exercise specialists who have managed to sort of combine the two. So as classes have come back and you probably can have much smaller numbers in your classes, you could also provide an online opportunity. So it's still people you can still have feedback. It's done on Zoom. So I think, again, we need to think of those fusions. It doesn't have to be just online or offline. It could be a combination of the two, and then you can flex it depending on what's happening in the situation or depending on your circumstances at home. So I think just thinking sort of a little bit laterally might help get some of those solutions.
For Emma and Jodie, someone's asked, are you worried for the security of your sport after lockdown? We touched on that a little bit, but do you think your sports needs more resources to recover from this period compared to men's sports? So I know we already covered that a little bit, but I guess any particular issues which you think your sport is facing?
I'll go in first. I think rugby in particular, rugby league and rugby union, it's the element of contact that we have as part of our sport is naturally a hindrance and a barrier for us at the minute. There's a lot of research and discussions going on at the minute around how can we adapt our sport to be less contact based, which I think when you're tackling each other and trying to stop them to get into a line, that's really difficult. So there's been elements of taking scrums out of the play, reducing game times, been spoken about, all different options, which are real barriers that we have to look at. And I think the main one, which Emma spoke about before, was it's the testing is the main difference and the worry for women's sport, because for us, the men's Super League has now got back playing. They played their first matches back from lockdown last weekend, and it was fantastic to see, and it's so good that we're getting some rugby league back up and running. But the women's game, there just isn't the money to fund testing, and that is going to be a hindrance for us, because until we're at a point where things are dramatically back to normal, or there's some kind of vaccine, or the testing becomes a lot more affordable, we will struggle. And I think that's the main barrier, and one that's not an easy one to overcome, really.
And I think similarly with netball, so they're looking at ways to change the game, and netball's non-contact, but I think everyone knows that there's a lot of contact.
Especially when the nails come out. The nails in netball is the real one.
Lots of contact, elbows, and so you stand in close proximity to people, and so I think it's very difficult, and they're looking at ways to change the game. I think one of the things is being penalised if you contact someone standing down 4 feet away instead of next to them, but then you still might contact someone, so it's very difficult, I think, to sort of navigate through. But yeah, as Jodie said, it's the testing, and I think England Netball have Rise Again as a campaign where they're trying to put the emphasis in there to help people realise that netball will rise again and we will come back. But I think it is really difficult, and so potentially, I guess Steph mentioned that funding is very limited, but some sort of funding potentially needs to be put in place so that netball and female sport can come back, because the longer we are without these sports, and not necessarily just at the elite level but at the community level as well, the harder it is for people to get back, the more likely it is that people become sedentary or disengaged. So I think it is just about thinking here and now, what can we do to make it return as soon as possible.
Jodie, someone asked as a follow-up on a similar topic about sustainability of women's rugby league and the difference compared to the men. And I know obviously rugby league got a government loan quite soon into lockdown to keep it afloat, because it provides such a big part of the communities in the north of England. So where would you like to see that support come from? Is it sponsors? Is it the governing body? Is it who is it, broadcasters? Who's the one who really needs to help and support and keep things moving?
A really good question. I think the governing body, from my experience, they're pressed really thin at the minute, as are all sports governing bodies, and the next 12 months are going to be really difficult, I think, for the RFL, and to try and look at where can they make cuts, because as a sport that they are really struggling, and trying to ask them for more input and funding into the women's game, I think would be too big of an ask at the minute. For me, it does have to come from sponsors, people outside of the sport who want to make sure that the progress that's being seen in women's sport continues. We've seen over the last couple of years in women's rugby league, for the first time ever last year, we had a sponsor for the Challenge Cup, and we had a sponsor for the Women's Super League. So for the first time ever, that's external sponsors coming in and putting money into our sport. Now, it's not extortionate amounts, it just keeps the tournament going. But the more, I think, particularly in women's sport, your investment can have such a huge impact. In men's sport that's been around for decades, and there's not massive changes, and if you don't invest in that sport, someone else, some other company, some other business will come along and do that same thing. Whereas we're in a position now with women's sport where a company can come along and completely transform a sport from where it is. In the talking for rugby league experience, but I'm sure there's many other sports out there where if a big sponsor came in and put the investment into the game, they could change it and take it forward 30 years within one 12-month period. So for me, I'd like to see big companies, maybe people who have possibly benefited from changes to how we do things during this pandemic, and how can they reinvest back into different areas like sport where they've took a massive hit. So hopefully, there'll be some companies wanting to give back and see how they can make a positive change coming out the other side of it.
And I think, as Jodie said, putting a big, she mentioned big investment, and actually because of where female sport is placed compared to male sport, a big investment for female sport is going to be a significant amount less than investing in male sport. So you can make such a big difference with a small amount of money. And I know the economy is struggling at the moment and people are unsure of their jobs and things, but there is still money out there, and there are still companies who are looking for ways to show their support and help. And actually, with 50% of the population being female, if you invest in a female sport, hopefully you'll attract male attention, but also you'll gain the attention of half of the population. And so where better to spend your money than actually spending less money and achieving potentially an equal or bigger outcome? Yeah,
definitely. Kate, someone's asked about a re-establishment of men's sports and boys sports and girls sports. So I know we looked at, or Sport England talked about the fact that there had actually been a bit of an increase in activity levels among girls, perhaps because if they're not participating in as many team sports, they may be getting active in other ways through Zoom, YouTube, Instagram, whatever it may be. So how do you think the impact of lockdown might influence those visible changes between girls and boys sport, and obviously when school comes back as well, how that might be impacted?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have learned some things from, it's probably the best deprivation exercise, and you start to learn things from that. So I think what we have seen is those more accessible exercises have attracted some of the less active girls to take part and feel confident and comfortable about doing that. So I think that's probably confirmed something we know, but we do need to think very hard about how do we make sport and exercise more relevant to those girls. And I think that learning is helpful, that simplicity, that non-judgmental space. And I think it's all about where are they taking part and who are they taking part with. So sometimes taking part in sport and exercise at school for somebody who doesn't think they're very sporty is not the best environment for them to feel comfortable. So I think what the lockdown has done is allowed them to have some space to take part in a more comfortable environment, and that's an important learning for us to take forward. I think what we have to, I think one of the concerns is actually that in school sport, obviously when we go back, there probably won't be the competitions and the inter-school sports that we've seen before. And equally with the bubble systems, we may find that because there are fewer girls taking part in certain sports, those bubbles might not allow a critical mass to keep that particular club or something running. So we do need to think very carefully about, if that's not happening, how we can, again, creatively bring those girls, those active girls who are not doing enough because that's happened, back into sport, and capitalise on some of that simplicity and outside activity, more outside opportunities for girls to start to get involved in sport and exercise.
Yeah,
and sorry, no, Jodie, jump in.
Just to build on that as well, I think what I see across some of the mums in our team, so playing at Saints, there's a couple of the women have got children, and obviously we spoke about the research and about the added responsibility at home and trying to balance everything. But what they've done is they actually started to bring the children to training. So it was an outdoor space where the kids could run around, play, but not just the fact that they were outside and they were running around. It was seeing their mum be active and looking up to them. And we've seen an increase in the activity levels of the young girls whose mums are coming to training, because they can see, it's normal for women and girls to be active and to do this, and I want to be like my mum. My mum's a role model, and I think that's been really inspiring. I don't have any children, but seeing that, I thought, wow, I can imagine if I was a young girl and I could see my mum playing rugby, I'd be impressed. And we've seen that, and even with our coaches, is a male, but he's brought his daughter down because she wanted to get out of the house, so she's been coming to training and she's got so much more active. She started joining in our fitness sessions and she's lost so much weight. She looks so much healthier and she's absolutely loving being around us and has built in confidence. So having young girls exposed to situations that they wouldn't have done in a normal situation, I think's also inspired some young girls to take part in new activities.
Yeah, that really kind of lends itself to the last question we got, because it just shows the importance of visibility of women's sports. So something that I've had emails about in response to our newsletter is people who really want to know how to support the return of elite women's sport. And they may just be fans or they may work in the sector as well. So Jodie and Emma, what would you say to any stakeholder and any fan as well? What could they do to support? We talked about money, but what are the other elements to it as well?
I think one of the things is actually just being heard. So getting out there, if it's a particular sport that you follow, following the sport on social media. And I think just one of the biggest things, I think, is making enough noise. So the government are trying to do their best, but the more they hear that we need to see these things, the more they will be inclined, I think, to show their support. So I think making as much noise as we possibly can, following people or governing bodies. I think also, as we've talked about funding, and funding is probably one of the largest barriers. I think with netball, one of the issues in the UK is they don't have physical assets, and so they're relying on sports centres and universities, and actually that's what makes it slightly difficult, because netball aren't at liberty to just start participation. They have to rely on the guidelines that all these people are following. And so I think if you were someone richer, you had access to facilities, that would be amazing. And if you could just open up the facility to let some of the community use your space or use your court. I think there are lots of little different ways that we can support it, but I think the aim is just hopefully let female sport come back so that people can see, as Jodie mentioned with her example, if you can see people doing things, it encourages you, it inspires you, and hopefully that will lead to you speaking about it to other people, which will then just start the ball rolling and hopefully encourage others.
Absolutely, yeah. Just make noise and talk about it is a really key thing. Particularly social media is so powerful, and it's been enlightening for me to see through lockdown. I've had quite a few parents and different coaches contact me around the young girls in their team and how they're really missing playing, or they really want some sort of activity. What can they take part? Can you give them any advice? What can they be doing right now whilst they're not able to play? And that was inspiring to me to see that there are young people out there who really are looking up to some of the players, and we've not had that media profile before. And that's what raising the profile of the game has brought young girls being able to look up to us. So using, as Emma said, social media, talking about it, making noise about wanting to see women's sport again. And similarly with the facilities, we found a barrier in terms of, understandably, with the men's team, it's about really protecting the environments that they're using and not having them exposed to too many other people, because that obviously causes complications in terms of sanitizing before and after. So we've had that similar barrier in terms of trying to get back into gyms, etc., and people opening up their own gyms, giving us access at private times has really made a difference. And I think if anybody can do that and has the ability to just provide a little bit of extra resource to local women's teams in order to let them get back up and running in one way or another, I think that will really help.
Well, I think that's a perfect way to end things. And I know, we always at Women in Sport talk about visibility, and, without that visibility, how do we inspire that participation at the grassroots? So thank you for everyone for tuning in to watch this. If you want to watch it again or watch it back or miss some of it, then this YouTube link will stay the same, so you can watch it. And as always, we'll be releasing the audio version on Spotify, iTunes and Audioboom. Please do review us on any of those platforms. Our lockdown research is up on our website. You can look at it for free. You can also get in touch with us at support@womeninsport.org. Thank you to our wonderful panel for taking the time in 30-degree humidity today, and also thank you to Stacey and the CSM Live team for supporting us and making this podcast happen. We hope you've all enjoyed it, and when we can, we'll be doing some in-person events, and hopefully we can all kind of be together again and chat about these things in the flesh. But yeah, thank you to everyone. It's been great.